My name is Fabien Delage, and I didn't believe in ghosts. I travel across France and explore the most haunted places I can find. I'm not alone on this adventure. My friend Julian Mazzatelli, a wilderness survival expert, follows me on all of my journeys. Together, we spend one day and one night in France's most haunted houses to put their reputation to the test. Today we'll be studying the case of the uncork'd domain. In the 1960s, this secluded estate of the Champagne countryside experienced the most unsettling time of its history when a millenarist religious group called Les Enfants du Devoir Sacré, the Children of the Sacred Duty, moved into this 18th century manor beside a farmhouse surrounded by fields and woods. They started living in this old building, which once belonged to the noble Paranormal family, as a semi-autonomous community. They worked in the fields and in the farmhouse's workshop they called the Salvation Square. In this part of the house were various granaries, a stable, a joinery, a forge, and a weaving workshop.
Il y a un escalier là, mais qui donne sur rien. C'est dommage, parce qu'il y a plein de pièces à l'étage, mais on peut pas y accéder, quoi.
There's something particularly worth noting concerning the building layout. Tunnels used to run from the manor's cellar to the farmhouse's stable. This community's religious zeal would later lead the Vatican to consider it a cult.
Il y a plein de pièces, il y a encore un étage supplémentaire.
It was founded by Jean Degain, a megalomaniac factory supervisor turned spiritual guide and almighty leader, when he inherited the domain. He then quit his job at the metalwork factory, where he was famous for being quite a mystical and over-conscientious character.
Ça a l'air d'être la cuisine ici.
For years, he'd craved to create a human-scale apostolic world following his own conception of spirituality. It turned out to be fairly easy for him to initiate a dozen idle people into his plans, beliefs, and rules. One main belief was that physical work is deeply linked to soul improvement. Manual work lightens the soul so it reaches heaven faster when we draw our last breath and leave this mortal coil. That's why 2 graveyards were discovered in the square courtyard and in the fields. The bodies of the departed had to rest close to their workplace. The investigation also pointed out something quite disconcerting. As Mr. Degain considered sexual intercourse physical work, he promoted swinging and wife sharing, himself being a single man. He never spent a night alone, indulging in all kinds of sexual perversions with other men's wives. Several children born from these affairs never left the community and attended school there, which made controlling their minds even easier for the guru. Through the years, several members suffered premature death due to malnutrition and work accidents, mostly because medication was considered an insult to the body, a sin. Whenever members broke the rules or took some liberties with the true lifestyle dictated by the cult leader, they had to do penance to purify their souls. Whether they liked it or not, the sinners were locked and tied up for 3 days in the manor's cellar, without food nor water. This punishment aimed at confusing the penitents' sense of time, so they would feel totally dependent on the community.
J'avais pas vu cet escalier.
In the late 1980s, when the cult reached its height, it consisted of 23 members, mostly teenagers born inside the domain. Jean acted as their father, whether he was or not, and imposed stricter rules to gain even more control over them. He established a prophetic day for the end of the world on June 16, 1988, when all members of the community committed suicide in the farm courtyard. A few months later, the bodies were discovered in an advanced state of decomposition by the local authorities after they received a call from Mr. DeGain's mortgage holders, who had been unable to contact him. Officers investigating the farm found the suicide grave as well as the older tombs. They also unearthed the diary the guru kept on a daily basis. This notebook is the only available material concerning rules and life within the community. All bodies were returned to their families, even though the cult members never kept in touch with them. To this day, the domain has been empty and almost in ruins, for no one chose to maintain it. Some villagers from the area believe that the ghost of Jean DeGain still lingers in the manor, and that the souls of the departed gather at nightfall in the cellar, the place where their guru killed himself on June 16, 1988. He cut his own throat and, for unknown reasons, watched his blood drip into a pipe buried in the ground.
Je sais pas du tout ce qu'il y a dans ce trou.
What lies underneath the cellar? We'll never know, but here's where we'll spend the night. Julian lights up a few candles and lays out the sleeping bags. We stay up all night, watchful and on guard. Unfortunately, it remains very quiet, and no particular manifestation catches our attention. It seems that the ghosts of the uncork'd domain are of the reserved kind. But we are far from giving up. Our journey has just begun. Today we'll be investigating tr&eacute Psychiatric Institution, located in the north of France. This medical facility, set deep in the woods, opened in 1932. At that time, it consisted of 3 main buildings, laid out parallel to one another. The 1,230-foot-long master building was the actual sanatorium. It was devoted to the treatment of tuberculosis, pulmonary infection caused by the Koch bacillus. At that time, the facility could accommodate up to 750 patients under the supervision of 200 health workers.
Regarde. C'est le dossier d'un patient.
However, as research improved the efficiency of BCG vaccination and tuberculosis screening and therapies, this kind of facility quickly became obsolete. Once tuberculosis was eradicated, the sanatorium became a quarantine zone where people were sent to die. Reductions of the medical staff eventually led to the closing down of the facility in early 1966, 30-odd years after its opening. The sanatorium became a mental institution and reopened later that year with a brand new wing dedicated to child psychiatry. 3 years later, the hospital attracted local media attention when Catherine Giseline, a 9-year-old girl diagnosed with behavioral disorders, threw herself out a window. The head doctor of the service asserted that she either committed suicide or accidentally fell. Unfortunately for him, one journalist cleverly pointed out that the window handle was far too high for the child to reach. Moreover, the autopsy results revealed bruises on the girl's wrists and ankles, as well as cuts caused by a sharp object inside her mouth. The child being an orphan, no charges were pressed, and the case was dropped. Most people chose to ignore the event. Despite this, a journalist who had also been treated in the sanatorium named Gustave Marlotti resumed his investigation only to discover that other patients from various wards had gone missing. Our exploration is suddenly interrupted by the arrival of a group of policemen who seem to have come here to perform some kind of training. No one knows we are here, and we do not want to attract attention to us. We hide and wait for them to leave before resuming our investigation. The hospital registers showed some signs of forgery concerning patients without any known family or who had been forgotten by their relatives. Eager to uncover the truth, Gustave started working undercover as a healthcare assistant. Gustave wrote the following account with blatant disgust in his memoirs. As I was walking along the Ward B corridor, trying to collect evidence, a healthcare assistant came out of a room and addressed me. She asked me for help and ushered me into the room. A patient was lying there on his stomach, on a table, weights hanging from his wrists and ankles to prevent him from moving. She proceeded to rape the young man with her baton, while a male nurse broke his jaw and put his penis in his mouth. To keep my identity a secret, I had to take part in the abuse. My workmates laughed and screamed as if they really enjoyed what I thought had become a habit. The victim died, unable to fight his persecutors' deadly depravity. We took the body down to the kitchens to be cut up and cooked for the other patients' dinner. He also stated that some patients were locked up in the cells lining the underground corridors. On their foreheads were the names of the staff member each belonged to. These patients would be tortured each day. Their inedible body parts were found buried in a room at the far end of the tunnel. Mr. Marlotti's writings still remain the only accurate testimony of what happened in Tanin-sous-Vecine mental institution, as he eventually went missing too. On the night of October 5th, 1969, a fire of unknown origin burnt down the child psychiatry wing. No patient or staff member was found. As people became increasingly suspicious, the institution closed its doors for good. Only a few patients were transferred. The others were abandoned in their rooms with no supervision whatsoever. None of the bodies were found.
Le souterrain continue, encore loin là-bas, mais je vois même pas le fond. Mais là, tout est inondé. C'est pas grave. On va prendre l'escalier qui est juste là.
We decide to spend the night in one of those cells.
Par contre, si vous êtes complètement isolé du vent et du froid, faut trouver un autre.
It's freezing, and the cold shortens the battery life of our electronic devices. Julian starts looking for some material that will help us fight the cold and seal the holes in the walls. Pain and fear still appear to be dripping from the ceiling.
retourner. On a fait ce qu'on a pu, mais au moins c'est isolé, il n'y a plus de courant d'air. Maintenant il nous reste à passer une bonne nuit. Voilà.
Nothing will disturb our sleep at night. We leave the dreariest mental institution France has ever known feeling quite relieved and resume our journey. Still, there are many surprises yet to come. Today, we'll be investigating Garren-sur-Somme Castle, located in the Marne department. After the French Revolution in 1789, the castle became the property of the state and was soon sold to a commoner. A couple centuries later, in 1993, a bank manager and his wife bought the castle and moved in with their two children, Lucy, 12, and Matteo, 5. They hired a nanny to do the housework, cook, and look after the children while their father was away. On the night of March 18, 1996, the head of the household, Albert Vermont, filed a complaint to the local authorities. He had almost died escaping an attacker who had killed the entire family inside their very house. The father assured the police that he was the only one alive, as his wife, kids, and nanny had died in the attack. Albert's story went like this. Earlier that night at dinner time, a man came knocking on the castle's door, seeking shelter from the pouring rain. He was unshaven and wore dirty, worn-out clothes. He said he was a wanderer on a pilgrimage, which won the pious family's trust.
Sur la cabine téléphonique, il y a le numéro du château.
They shared their meal with him. Their guest remained silent until suddenly he took out a gun and asked everyone to take off their clothes. The terrified family had no choice but to comply. The stranger then tried to force himself on the mother, and when she resisted, shot her daughter in the stomach.
Fais gaffe, c'est froid.
That's when the nanny walked into the dining room and screamed. Another bullet silenced her for good. He then ordered the son to finish off his sister with a knife, but the boy, who was only 8 years old at the time, couldn't find the strength to comply. The stranger started to lose his temper and threatened to kill the boy's mother if he didn't slit his sister's throat. The boy had to give it more than one try, and as the girl slowly died, the stranger lifted his gun and shot the mother dead. He then laughed and shouted, "Too late, too late."
T'as vu qui c'était? Continue. Fais pas de bruit.
The stranger then forced the father to have sexual intercourse with his wife's dead body in front of his crying son. All the while, he continued shooting the woman in the face till she was unrecognizable. He then tied up the father and went upstairs with the son. The father heard his boy scream and then a gunshot. At that point, the father managed to undo his bonds and run to the nearest police station, where he made this statement. The authorities sealed off the castle and opened a case. However, several details didn't match the father's story. As days went by, he became more and more agitated and eventually gave in to police pressure. He confessed he had planned to kill his family and eventually did so. His wife had discovered that he often visited prostitutes. She said she wanted a divorce on grounds of adultery. Frightened he would lose his reputation, the custody of his children, and his house if the rumor spread, he turned to drastic solutions. Later that year, he killed himself in his prison cell. Someone else now owns the castle, but it has remained empty. Villagers still remember the despicable crimes that happened there. How could a father perform such terribly sadistic acts upon his own family? Why would he act so hideously? We might be able to ask him ourselves, as we're planning on spending the night in the attic where he murdered his son. One thing's for sure. Something was wrong with Mr. Vermont. Around 3 a.m., we wake up to some racket coming from downstairs. We use a night vision camera and a long-range device so we can see without being seen. We silently look through the camera, waiting for an unexpected guest. Obviously, this is not Mr. Vermont's ghost, but a rather real prowler. Thanks to our night vision device, we can record his wanderings while remaining hidden. He doesn't know we're here, and we don't know why and how he got there, or how he can move around in such utter darkness. Sometimes, men can be more dangerous and more frightening than ghosts. After a few hours roaming around, the strange character eventually vanishes in the dark. We won't be able to go back to sleep. Could it be a message from Mr. Vermont? No paranormal activity was monitored that night in the Garren-sur-Somme castle, though we were absolutely not expecting what was to come. Today we'll visit one of the most beautifully frightening places in France, the Trinité orphanage. In 1881, Ernestine Lacroix established the institution in the family manor after her husband, a career officer in the army, died. Big-hearted but penniless, she had a hard time retaining her servants in order to keep the domain running. This woman, who had no children of her own, managed to open her orphanage after convincing the town of Bivers-sur-Oise to seek an authorization from the region. Thanks to the funds collected, she was able to keep her servants, a chaplain, a cook and his assistant, 2 maids, and a gamekeeper who doubled up as a gardener. At that time, the orphanage could accommodate up to 15 girls aged 6 to 18. In April 1885, the assistant cook died under suspicious circumstances. The boy, whom everyone knew to be merry and outgoing, was found dead in the property's lake, though his body showed no signs of drowning. Astonished, the widow had to find someone new to fit the position. A man passing through town and looking for a seasonal job answered the offer. His name was Célestin Leprest. Quite ironically, he turned out to be one of the orphan's father. He hadn't seen his daughter Pauline since she was a little baby. As a matter of fact, his battered wife Martha ran away with their only daughter, who was just 3 months old at the time. She found refuge in a local brothel where she died of smallpox. Her daughter Pauline, aged 7, was put in the orphanage in 1884. When he saw her, Célestin was astonished. His daughter looked exactly like her mother. Months went by, but Célestin still felt out of place. Something was eating him up. Seeing his daughter's face every day reminded him so much of the woman who left him. He was craving revenge. However, though he was quite unfriendly to his workmates, his employer never complained about his work. On the eve of November 27th, he eventually put his sinister plan into action and placed rat poison in all of the staff's food. Everyone but the gamekeeper, who lived in a small house at the doors of the domain, shared the meal. Within the hour, the first symptoms kicked in. Racing heartbeat, short breath, heaviness of the body, and fatigue. The servants had to remain against their will in the staff's canteen, where they started vomiting blood and eventually died. The widow alone managed to reach her office. In the meantime, Célestin was roaming the orphanage, knife and cleaver in hand. According to the police report, the blades first hit 2 girls who were reading in the library. Taken off guard, they didn't have the chance to scream nor call for help. Then, the murderer probably went back and entered the living room, where 3 of the oldest girls were. The fight must have been quite violent, for signs of struggle were everywhere. The other victims were found dead upstairs, in the bedrooms and bathrooms. 2 bodies were discovered piled up in a bathtub. only one girl managed to escape, for she was found in the domain's garden, next to the pergola. Pauline's body, or rather, what was left of it, was found in her bed, hatefully and heavily mutilated. Celestine lay dead with slit wrists in the very same room. The massacre was only discovered the next morning, when the gamekeeper took his shift. In his statement, he said that he rushed into the widow's office, where she had just installed the first phone of the house, and called the local authorities. The evidence collected on site proved Mr. Celestine Leprestre guilty. He had eventually joined his daughter in death. They would never be parted again. Today we'll be investigating what locals know as the Tragic House. In the heart of Auvergne, next to the Puy de Dôme, lays an ancient wheat farmland. As soon as we get there, we think we might not be the first to visit the farmhouse since it's been closed. Animal bones are scattered all over the floor of what once was a child's bedroom. Piled up in a corner and hanging from the ceiling, they seem to be a warning from a grim visitor. Decaying wood is creaking underneath my feet, and the floor feels all wobbly as if it was going to cave in at any minute. We have to be careful and tread lightly if we don't want to fall through. We haven't stepped foot inside the house, yet an ominous sight already greets us. The remains of some dead animal, a cat or a fox, lie mummified in the hay. The animal's undoubtedly been resting there for years.
Okay, on ne devrait pas aller plus loin. Il y a des trous vraiment dans le parquet et le foin pourrait les masquer, donc on se tire de là, c'est trop dangereux.
The family car remains here too, untouched. The vehicle, as well as the garage, are still in ship shape. Nothing but dust has inhabited the place despite the passage of time. This room has remained locked for the past 20 years or so. The main building and its 100-year-old foundations was the Dubois family house. The building houses various workshops, a garage, an oven, and a granary. It once was the perfect farmhouse, a great summer getaway in the countryside.
Non, regarde. Ça date des années 70.
Unfortunately, fate caught up with the family in late August 1987. Miller Paul Dubois, his wife Genevieve, and 9-year-old twins Edouard and Simone had been enjoying a seemingly quiet and blissful life a few miles south from Cedron, a now deserted village. In reality, the Dubois family was far from happy, and the relationship between husband and wife was quite tense.
1987, il date ce journal.
Genevieve Dubois, who had been scheming to get her hands on the farm property, tried to poison her husband's tea. However, Paul Dubois noticed the poison the moment he took the first sip. Police discovered his saliva on the cup holding the deadly liquid as they searched the house. His wife's blood was found all over the bedroom walls, and the judge claimed it was a crime of passion. The impulsive husband retaliated by killing the wife who had attempted to murder him. Her body was unrecognizable, ripped to shreds by her barbaric husband. The coroner noted that she had several bruises caused by punching and kicking, and that she had been stabbed 87 times. This was a terrible act of nameless violence dictated by revenge. Paul was found hung in the same room. 2 weeks went by before the bodies were discovered. Despite the local authorities' efforts, the young boys were nowhere to be found. Since that day, Edouard and Simone have gone missing. They would be 34 by now. We finally enter the room where the Dubois suffered a painful death. This is where we choose to spend the night. Since the police emptied and closed up the place in 1987, no one has ever ventured in the tragic house again. We are supposedly the first people to enter these walls in 25 years. Yet, once more we witness quite a disturbing scene. The chair and rope Paul Dubois used to hang himself are still there in the room. Who could have recreated the suicide scene? Why would anyone be that grim? The local legend tells that both children, Edouard and Simone, were buried alive inside the house walls, but the police gave up checking each wall on the property. If that were the case, their ghosts would still haunt every single wall, screaming for salvation.
va mettre une bougie près de la porte. Comme ça, si quelqu'un rentre, on va dire qui c'est.
Others say the parents are still lurking in there, hiding in a corner of the house, caught in a never-ending wrath and passionate rage beyond death. They were cursed to walk this place forever and cause violent manifestations. Anyhow, we're going to spend the night in this house and monitor the rooms with our cameras. Hopefully, we'll witness some of these manifestations.
C'est quoi là?
C'est la chaise. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé?
Là, là, ouvert.
C'est un animal.
Tu crois que c'est un petit rat qui va se notifier comme une chaise?
C'est les fenêtres ouvertes, peut-être sur un chat qui est passé direct.
Non mon gars, cherche pas d'explication rationnelle hein.
Attends 2 secondes. Il y a une
Non mais
explication
c'est
rationnelle.
quoi ton explication? C'est quoi ton explication mec? Que dalle mon gars, on se casse.
Mais pourquoi tu veux qu'on se casse de toute façon?
On se casse putain.
On va partir, on vient de nulle part hein.
On se casse mec, écoute, on se casse direct. On se part, on prend les affaires, on se part tout de suite. Éteins cette caméra, putain c'est fini. On arrête là, stop.
We are miles away from civilization, and going back to the car in the middle of the night would be far too complicated. I eventually managed to talk Julien into staying where we are. We're all alone in the house. It's awfully quiet, except for some bats hunting in the next room. We can hardly think of an explanation for what we just saw. For now, I just put the chair away in the other room so it won't happen again. We go back to bed and eagerly await the sunrise. This is going to be a long night.
Je crois qu'il est temps de se barrer d'ici, on est.
Today we will be stopping in Haintery at number 27 Shamin deoy. In the area, this house is said to have had the greatest number of owners over the past 50 years. Entering this cluster of buildings sitting tight to one another is quite suffocating. The different houses seem to date back to the early 20th century, except for the chapel built in 1987. People around here truly believe that they are haunted, and no one dares crossing the gates. Only outsiders have ever bought this place and brought it back to life. Unfortunately, their tenancy never lasts long. The great number of owners made it really difficult for us to establish the full history of the house. Despite this lack of information, number 27 remains frightfully interesting. The oldest family whose experiences were recorded moved into the house in 1954, The Mangulos had inherited the place from their farmer ancestors. They mentioned objects disappearing, doors slamming and locking from the inside, strange screaming, and a strong urine smell in their bedroom. They couldn't think of any decent explanation for these phenomena. They moved out right after their son was taken into the hospital under strange circumstances. The following month, the property was sold to a family from Normandy, who stayed there just 3 months. The floor is really wobbly. I was only distracted for a second, and my left leg went through the wood, ripping my skin open through my pants. Fortunately, Julian has all the supplies we need to dress the wound so we can resume our visit. I just hope this number 27 experience won't leave a scar on my tattoo. Many owners came and went, until March 1963, when a widow inherited the keys. Her name was Marguerite Tessier, and she hoped to start a new life now that her husband had died. Sadly, she soon heard footsteps upstairs and noted that her cats were anxious by day and afraid by night. Marguerite Tessier felt an overwhelming presence. After a week, one of her cats gave birth to 5 kittens, all stillborn. Fearing for her life, she called the Haintery priest. When he heard which house he was to visit, he politely declined any of the widow's desperate requests. She began to understand why none of her neighbors ever welcomed her. In town, this house was definitely a place to avoid. For years, villagers had been telling its frightening story. There was no need to make up scary tales. Facts were terrifying enough. One day, Mrs. Tessier suddenly awoke to the sound of a distressed wail from one of her cats. She tried to get up, but something was weighing on her breast and prevented her from moving. When the wailing stopped, the force holding her prisoner let her go. She rushed into the kitchen. Some cats were running in the opposite direction, growling. When she stepped into the kitchen, she saw a cat lying on the floor. Its body had been burnt at a high temperature. Its head, however, was untouched by the fire. She then turned to the broken and blood-stained door. Outside, she found another of her pets, still alive, but with its belly ripped apart and painfully trying to reach the gates of the property. Was it thrown out the window, or was it trying to run away? The question remains.
Quoi? J'ai des vertiges. J'ai du mal à respirer.
The widow left number 27 on the same day, never to return. The house remained empty for the next 2 years. The press mentioned that on November 13th, 1964, 2 young runaways hiding in the house claimed they saw a human-shaped silhouette crossing the corridor. stopping to stare at them, and then disappearing into one of the bedrooms. In 1983, the new owners, an English couple, noted that some tools had gone missing and feces had been spread all over the walls. The mother even said she had been sexually abused by an entity, and her daughter claimed she felt invisible hands grabbing her during her sleep. The family quickly left the house. The property has remained empty and for sale for more than 20 years now. Number 27 Chemin de Roy holds on to its secrets, and no one dares enter it.
Non, c'est ici que ça s'est passé en fait. Et c'est ici qu'on va passer la nuit.
We decide to spend the night in the room where it is said that, in 1954, some entity held Robin Mangulo, 23, prisoner for a few minutes, and where his parents witnessed terrifying events. So far, they have remained unexplained.
Putain mec, c'est quoi ce bruit?
C'est quoi le péage d'une talente?
Attends, allez où? C'est là de l'autre côté. Dépêche-toi. J'entends plus rien mec. Comme ça il disparaît. T'es sûr de vouloir aller voir plus loin mec? C'est qui vient d'ici?
Je vois qu'il n'y a plus rien du tout.
C'est passé direct. Hein?
Today we'll be visiting the castle of Malort-le-Castel. Built in the early days of the 100 Years' War, on an island along the river Somme, Malort-le-Castel fell into ruin as the war ended. It then only played a strategic role. In the early 19th century, a medieval enthusiast working as a professional pianist had the castle rebuilt in a flamboyant Gothic style, which used to be all the rage in 15th and 16th century Europe. After his wife died giving birth to their only daughter, Guy de Clercq withdrew into his castle, preferring to live in seclusion. Living on his annuity, he had everything delivered at home so he could raise his daughter Catherine. He spent the rest of his life composing laments, expressing the distress he felt when he lost the love of his life. He taught his daughter those melancholic melodies, forcing her to play them over and over again. Making the girl feel guilty for having killed the only woman he ever loved was just the first step to an ever-growing violence that was to last for years.